She had memorized every lie in Maddox's ledgers long before she memorized the layout of his office. 3 years into the job, she knew which invoices were real and which were manufactured, which contractors existed and which were shell accounts collecting payments for services that were never rendered. She knew that the third column in the offshore reports was always inflated by 12%, and that Maddox knew it too, because he signed off on them with the same deliberate pen stroke he used for everything. Controlled, final. A man who had made his decision before the pen ever touched paper. She knew him through numbers. That was the only way she had ever known anyone worth knowing. Her name was Veda Kerr. She had grown up in Longueuil, in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled of cigarette smoke and instant coffee, and she had learned early that the only thing standing between her and her mother's life was an ability to make numbers behave. She was good at it, the way some people are good at reading rooms or holding grudges, naturally, without effort, and with a persistence that made other people uncomfortable. Maddox had found her through a corporate accounting firm where she had spent 2 years drowning. Someone had flagged an irregularity in a shell company audit. She had found it. She had also found 4 others the original auditors had missed. 3 weeks later, a man in a very expensive coat had offered her twice her salary to find irregularities for someone who could actually use the information. She had asked exactly one question: "Is this legal?" The man in the coat had smiled. She had taken the job. That had been 3 years ago. She was 29 now, and she understood that the question she had asked had been the wrong one. The right question would have been, "Is this survivable?" The answer so far was yes, but only because she was useful, and only because she had never given Maddox a reason to look at her as anything other than the woman who kept his books from bleeding out. The office was on the 14th floor of a building in Griffintown that nominally housed a logistics company. Veda's desk was in the outer room, one wall of glass overlooking the St. Lawrence, the other solid concrete fitted with filing cabinets she knew better than to leave unlocked. The inner office was Maddox's. He kept the door shut. He opened it when he wanted something. It was a Thursday in March, grey and dripping, the city still wearing its winter in patches of dirty ice along the curbs. She was cross-referencing a set of invoices from the Port of Montreal, real ones this time, a renegotiated contract with a union local that had finally stopped demanding percentages that appeared nowhere in the operating budget, when his door opened. He stood in the frame. He did that sometimes, just stood there without announcing anything, as though he needed to confirm she was still at her desk and had not decided in the interim to walk out. He was a large man, not tall the way someone designed for attention was tall, but broad across the shoulders in a way that made door frames look slightly undersized. There was a scar along his jaw, old, healed white, and another on his left hand that she had never asked about. His hair was dark going silver at the temples. He wore the same category of suit every day, charcoal or navy, no tie, the top button of his shirt open. He looked like a man who had learned what wealth was supposed to look like and had adopted the uniform without much interest in it. "The Longueuil storage fee," he said. "It's up 30% over last quarter." Cold snap drove up heating costs. Veda didn't look up from the screen. "I've already flagged it in the report. It's legitimate." "Check it again." "I checked it twice before I put it in the report." A pause. "Check it a third time." She looked up. Maddox was watching her with the flat, assessing attention he gave to numbers and potential problems, which, in her experience, were the same category in his mind. "I'll check it a third time," she said evenly, "if you tell me what you think I missed." He said nothing. He rarely answered direct questions. He stepped back into his office and pulled the door shut. She checked it a third time. There was nothing wrong with it. She put the result in an email, sent it with a single line. "The figure is accurate," and went back to the port invoices. At 4 o'clock, she saved her work, closed the programs in the correct order. There was a correct order. She had established it early in her tenure and did not deviate from it, and gathered her coat from the rack. Maddox's door was open again. "I have a personal appointment," she said before he could speak. "I'll be in by 8 tomorrow. The quarterly projection draft is in the shared folder." The silence he gave her was the tight one. She had catalogued every silence in 3 years of working for Jorin Maddox. The dismissive silence, the calculating silence, the silence he deployed when someone had said something that was going to cost them. This silence was none of those. It was tighter, contained the way pressure was contained. "Personal," he repeated. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. She kept her expression neutral. She was very good at neutral. "Fine," he said, flat final, already having moved on to the next calculation, or performing the move. She wasn't sure which. She left. The restaurant was on Saint-Denis, small and warm and crowded with mismatched chairs, and the smell of something roasting with garlic and red wine. Fletcher had chosen it. He was the kind of man who researched restaurants the way other people researched investments, carefully and with genuine enthusiasm, and Veda had found this unexpectedly charming. She had met him 5 weeks ago at a friend's birthday at a bar in the Plateau. He taught grade 10 history at a school in NDG. He was 32, with an easy laugh, and the particular quality of a person who had not spent years learning to keep his face blank in rooms where the wrong expression was a liability. He was warm. He was safe. He was about as far from every man she spent her working hours around as it was possible to be. She wore a dark red dress she had owned for 2 years and rarely found occasion for, and she had left her hair loose, and she was laughing at something Fletcher had said about a student who had submitted an essay arguing that Louis Riel was a time traveler when she felt it. The particular prickling along the back of her neck, the awareness trained into her over 3 years of being observed. She glanced toward the front window. The street outside was wet and dark, the streetlight fracturing in the rain. She thought she saw a shape, a man, completely still, standing just past the awning where the light didn't reach. Large, still the way few people bothered to be still. She looked directly. There was nothing there, just rain and the street and the ordinary movement of a Thursday night. She told herself it was the job. 3 years of Maddox's world had calibrated her threat response, until she saw predators in shadows out of habit. She looked back at Fletcher. She ordered the duck. She had a second glass of wine. Fletcher's hand rested over hers on the tablecloth, unhurried and warm. She let it stay. She thought, this is what a normal life feels like. It was almost enough to make her want one. The following Monday, there was a second cup of coffee on her desk when she arrived, black, no sugar. Exactly how she drank it. Maddox had never brought her coffee. In 3 years, the machine in the corner of the outer office had been entirely her domain. Maddox drank espresso from a specific cafe 3 blocks away, delivered by his driver, Gil, every morning at 7:45, without variation, without exception. She looked at the cup. She looked at his closed door. She drank the coffee and filed the anomaly and went back to work. On Tuesday, he rescheduled a meeting with a port contact to run through lunch, then had food delivered from the Lebanese place on Notre Dame that she had mentioned once in an offhand comment 8 months ago. He set a container on the corner of her desk without a word and went back to his call. On Wednesday, Fletcher texted to say he needed to cancel Saturday, a work thing. He'd explain later. He didn't explain later. On Thursday, she found it. She was cross-referencing disbursements against a real estate holding company. Routine work, the kind she could do half asleep, when a legal services invoice caught her eye. Buried in a subsidiary of a subsidiary, 3 layers deep in an organizational chart she herself had built, which was the only reason she recognized the architecture. 12 pages, legal target entity, Beaumont Terrace Holdings. She sat very still. Fletcher's building was called Beaumont Terrace. She had seen the name on the buzzer panel when she'd picked him up for their first dinner 3 weeks ago. She pulled the thread. She pulled 3 more. The colder the room became, the more methodical she got. This was what she did under pressure. Became quieter, more precise. like something being calibrated down to very fine tolerances. The property had been purchased above market rate within 48 hours. Not distressed acquisition, removal, the buyer. A holding trust, 2 intermediaries between it, and a numbered account she recognized from the syndicate's routing architecture. The encrypted table she maintained on a drive that lived in the bottom of her briefcase. The date on the purchase. The morning after her dinner on Saint-Denis. She kept pulling. A commercial loan extended to a sole proprietor, a tutoring and curriculum consulting business Fletcher had mentioned in passing, something he was building on the side. The loan had been called in early, a compliance flag filed with a regulatory body citing documentation irregularities. She found the flag, she found who had filed it, she found the gap in the timeline where it had been manufactured. Fletcher's side income was gone. His lease was being terminated under a renovation clause. His building was owned by a trust that was owned by a holding company that was, through 2 careful layers of insulation, owned by the man currently sitting in the office behind the heavy door at the end of the room. Veda did not print anything. She closed every file in the correct order and logged out of every terminal. She picked up what she needed. She walked to Maddox's door. She did not knock. He was on the phone. He held up one finger. She waited in front of his desk. She had stood in this room while men made decisions that ended other men's careers, their freedom, occasionally their lives. She had never been the subject of any of those decisions. She understood now that she had been wrong about that. He finished the call. He looked at her, and something behind his eyes shifted, barely perceptible. The fraction of tightening that meant a variable had appeared outside his projected range. "There's an invoice in the Martel subsidiary file," she said. "Beaumont Terrace Holdings." A pause 1 second too long. "We acquire distressed properties. Stand." It wasn't distressed. She placed the page on his desk. She had marked one line in yellow because she had learned early that Maddox read what was yellow. It was purchased above market rate in 48 hours. That's not acquisition, that's removal. Maddox looked at the page. He did not look up. "And the business loan," she continued, "the compliance flag, the early call-in." She waited. "I built the routing architecture those flags pass through. I know what a natural flag looks like. I know what a manufactured one looks like." The room was entirely quiet. Outside, through the glass, the St. Lawrence lay flat and grey under the March sky. Maddox finally looked up. His eyes were dark, and there was something in them she had catalogued in no previous reading of him. Not calculation, not assessment. Not the cold strategic patience he wore like a second layer of skin. Something unmanaged, something raw and out of place in his face, the way a crack is out of place in load-bearing structure. "He wasn't right for you," Maddox said. Such a simple thing, such a catastrophically simple thing to say. "You don't know anything about him." Her voice was still level. She was good at level, but something was moving underneath it now. Something that had sat quietly in her chest for 3 years and had just found a fracture to push through. "You source through a restaurant window for 30 seconds. I know he doesn't understand your life." "My life." She looked at him. "You mean your life, the life I'm adjacent to because you pay me to be adjacent to it. That isn't my life, Maddox. That is my job." She stepped back from the desk. "You dismantled a man's housing and his income because he held my hand over a table, because I laughed at something he said." He stood. He was always larger when he stood, and the desk between them suddenly felt inadequate. "You were going to waste yourself on someone who doesn't understand what you are." "I wasn't wasting anything." Her voice had an edge now. She let it stay. "I was having dinner with a decent man who didn't spend every conversation calculating the cost of my presence in the room." She picked up her bag. "You don't own me. You have never owned me. I am not a line item." "No." His voice dropped to something rough and stripped. "You're the only line I've never been able to balance." She walked to the door. Veda. It was the first time he had used her name in 3 years. Not Kerr, not the professional nothing of simply not addressing her at all. Her name. It landed somewhere she hadn't braced for. She kept walking. "I'll have a final accounting of all open files on Gil's desk by end of day," she said, without turning. "Everything is documented. You won't have trouble replacing me." The door closed behind her. She sat in her car in the parking garage for 4 minutes before starting the engine. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago, in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled of instant coffee and other people's cigarettes, that crying required spare time she didn't have. She drove home through the grey March city and told herself she had made the only rational decision available to her. She believed it. She did not open the message from Gil that lit up her phone on the passenger seat. 3 weeks, 21 days. She had a job offer. She accepted it, a forensic accounting consultancy, legitimate and quiet, with a salary that was reasonable and an office with decent light and colleagues who said good morning and meant it. She sat in a meeting on her 3rd day and listened to a senior partner explain quarterly reporting structures using concepts she had internalized at 23, and she nodded and she said the appropriate things, and she went home that evening to her apartment and sat on her couch with a file she could have summarized in 2 sentences. The work was clean, it was legal, it had no second set of books, no encrypted routing tables, no carefully maintained architecture of useful fictions. She hated it in a way that disturbed her. She admitted this to herself on a Thursday night while eating takeout pho that she could not taste, in the specific silence of a life with nothing at stake, that the Griffintown office, the awareness of consequence, the constant precision required to maintain the distinction between what was true and what was documented, had done something to her nervous system that could not be undone by adequate lighting and ergonomic chairs, that she did not know how to breathe air without weight in it. The knock came at 9:30. She looked through the peephole. Gil stood in the hall. He was normally unflappable. He had driven Maddox through 3 murder investigations and 1 federal inquiry without losing his composure. He looked flappable now. She opened the door. "He doesn't know I'm here," Gil said immediately. "He told me specifically not to come near you." "Come in." He sat at her kitchen table. He told her what had happened. While Maddox had been running distracted, off schedule, making decisions by instinct rather than calculation, not checking the numbers he should have been checking, a rival group out of Toronto had moved on the port contracts. There had been a meeting that had gone wrong in the way meetings went wrong in this world. Maddox had resolved it, but the resolution had been sloppy and 2 of their people were hurt, and Maddox had taken a hit from a length of rebar used in a way rebar was not designed to be used. He was at a safe house in Rosemont. He was refusing the doctor. He was sitting alone in the dark, and according to Gil's read of the situation, had not slept in 36 hours. "The Toronto group will move again," Gil said. "He knows it, and he's not. He isn't right. He's just sitting there." Veda looked at the foe. She looked at the file for work. She looked at the apartment and the silence in it, which was the clean, legal, suffocating silence of a life she had chosen with her better judgment, and which had, in 3 weeks, produced nothing she wanted to keep. "Give me the address," she said. The safe house was above a closed hardware store on a street that hadn't yet been renovated into something unrecognizable. Concrete staircase, single pull-chain fixture, steel door left on the latch. She pushed it open. 1 room, a cot, a table, a chair. Maddox sat with his elbows on his knees, his face toward the floor. His jacket was off. His shirt was torn at the side and a bandage, inadequate, self-applied, was wrapped around his ribs, already soaked through. He looked up. His hand moved to the gun on the table before he registered what he was seeing. When he saw her, he went completely still. "You're not here," he said. His voice was stripped of everything she recognized in it. "I'm more tired than I thought." "You're not hallucinating." She crossed the room, set her bag on the table, pulled out the first aid kit, pulled out the thermos of coffee she had stopped for at a pharmacy on the way, because she had known what she would find, and she had known what he would need. She set the thermos where he could see it. Jorin. His name deliberate, given its full weight. Take the shirt off. He didn't move. He watched her with the particular stillness of someone who had been managing pain long enough to be wary of anything that might require them to stop managing it. Take the shirt off. He pulled it over his head, slowly, with the careful movements of someone working around something that hurt. The damage was to his left side, above the hip, ugly, recent, inadequately addressed. She snapped on gloves. She cleaned the wound with the efficiency she brought to everything that mattered. When she pressed the gauze, his whole body went rigid, and his hands found her shoulders. Not grabbing, not pushing, just gripping, the way someone grips the edge of something solid when the ground shifts. "This is a mess," she said. "I know." The Toronto group is going to move again within the week. Their cash flow is overextended. I've had their financials for 2 months, the ones they don't know you have. 36 hours of targeted pressure on 3 specific points, and they'll pull back. They can't sustain a prolonged play. She replaced the bandage with something that would actually hold. "I know the 3 points. I know the exact figures. I can have the strategic outline on your secure drive by 6 in the morning." Silence. She worked. "That's why you're here," Maddox said. It wasn't quite a question. "Partly." She taped the dressing, peeled off the gloves, sat back and looked at him directly, the way she looked at a set of figures that required a definitive answer. "Partly because the alternative is a consultancy with ergonomic chairs and a quarterly reporting meeting where someone explains concept-level accounting to me like I haven't been running 12-layer shell infrastructure for 3 years. Something crossed his face, not the calculation she knew. The thing underneath the calculation, the thing she had glimpsed in the Griffintown office when she walked out, that had not resolved itself in 3 weeks, that was sitting there in the lamp-lit room above the hardware store, looking no less unmanaged than it had then. "What I did to him," Maddox said. "The man from the restaurant." She waited. It was wrong. The words came out weighted, the way he said things he had actually had to reach for. He didn't know anything. He didn't deserve it. She held his gaze. "No, he didn't. The lease purchase has been reversed. The building reverted to the original owner last week." He paused. "The loan call-in is being withdrawn as a filing error. There'll be a settlement paid through a legal intermediary, enough to cover the disruption and more. He won't know where it came from." She absorbed this. She had expected many things from Jorin Maddox in 3 years. She had not expected this particular thing. "Good," she said. "I am not," he stopped, started again. "I am aware of what I did. I am aware it was not something I can argue into a justifiable position." His jaw tightened. "I don't have a justification. I had a reaction I didn't manage, and I did what I knew how to do, and it was wrong." She looked at him for a long moment in the light of the single lamp, in the room that smelled of old concrete and the particular cold of a Montreal March that hadn't finished yet. "I want a 25% raise," she said. The corner of his mouth moved, the precursor to something she had no existing data point for. Done. And contracted hours mean contracted hours. If you need me past 6, you ask. You don't assume, and you don't use the work as a way to prevent me from having anything that isn't the work. Agreed. And you don't. She chose the words precisely. If you feel something, you say it. You don't calculate a workaround and deploy it through 3 shell companies. He held her gaze. The rawness in him was still there, unmanaged, and she found she did not need him to manage it in this particular moment. "I'll work on that." "You'll do better than work on it." "Yes," he said quietly, without equivocation. She picked up the thermos and put it within his reach. Black coffee, no sugar, exactly as she knew he would need it after 36 hours without sleep. She put her coat on. "I'll have the Toronto response outline on your drive by 6, she said. "Get some sleep first. You're not useful to anyone running on empty, and I need you functional." She walked to the door. She had her hand on the frame when he spoke. "Veda." She paused without turning. "Thank you." His voice was rough and entirely without the usual management applied to it. Just the words, unarmored. She pulled the door open. The March air came in cold and smelling of the river. 7% is the point where they fold, she said. I'll have the figures to prove it. Be ready to move by morning. She went down the concrete stairs and out into the street. The city was quiet in the way cities were quiet after midnight. Not silent, never silent, but settled into its own deep rhythm of movement and consequence, and the ordinary complicated machinery of people managing their lives in proximity to other people managing theirs. She walked to her car. She sat in it for a moment. She thought about the ergonomic chairs, the quarterly reporting meetings, the clean, legal, carefully correct life she had assembled over 3 weeks and found entirely unlivable. She started the engine. She thought about a 25% raise, about a man who had said something costly and meant it, about the particular precision required to maintain her own terms inside someone else's world, and how that precision was the most engaging problem she had encountered in 3 years, and how she was, against all reasonable judgment, very good at it. She had always known the difference between what was on the books and what was true. What was true was that she was already thinking through the Toronto file, already running the numbers, already, without noticing the exact moment it happened, back. She drove home through the city with its lights and its river and its April coming somewhere just past the grey edge of the weather, and she told herself this was a business decision, a rational response to an irrational 3 weeks, a woman who understood the difference between freedom and vacancy, making an informed choice about her own time. The numbers, as always, didn't lie. She was going to be there at 6.